In this video, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of installing SQL Server Express for use with DVAAPBase. Microsoft SQL Server is a powerful relational database system from Microsoft. Microsoft kindly makes available a free version of SQL Server called SQL Server Express. This provides all the same features as the full database system, and even in fact has enough capacity that most medium to small companies will need in order to run DVAAPBase. If you're a skilled computer user, this walkthrough may be all you need to do this install of SQL Server Express. But if you need additional help and more detail, I recommend you allow your IT support to install and configure SQL Server Express for you. In this walkthrough, I'll demonstrate installing SQL Server Express on the same workstation where I'm running DVAAPBase. This is what's called a standalone installation. That means everything you need to run DVAAPBase is contained on the same Windows computer. No additional servers are required. So we'll start by downloading SQL Server Express from the Microsoft website. Now, depending on the version being downloaded, the page on the site might change. Now, there's a few different options for SQL Server Express downloads. First of all, there's 32-bit and 64-bit versions. You'll need to know whether your computer you're installing on is 32-bit Windows or 64-bit Windows. The majority of recent computers are running 64-bit Windows, but you need to be certain of this before you download and install SQL Server Express. So I'm going to look in my settings here, and System, and About. So you'll see here I'm running 64-bit version of Windows. So there are a couple of 64-bit options for SQL Server Express. You can see those here. So which of those do we want to download? This download right here just includes SQL Server Express, just the database engine. But this one down here includes the tools that you would use to maintain the database. So this is the one we're going to download. You can see it's about a 1.1 gigabyte download. It's a large download, so be patient. I'll spare you from watching this downloading. Okay, so the download is done now, and right here in my downloads folder, we have the SQL Server Express installer, and we'll double-click that to start the installation. Now, since I'm a low-level user, I'll probably be asked to enter the administrator password, since SQL Server installation is it's going to impact the system. So here's the request for administrator privileges. And it's asking for the location for the extracted files. The default's fine. Right now it's extracting all the files that it'll be using for the installation. Okay, now the installer is running, and our first option here is to select the type of the installation that we're going to do. And we'll be selecting the first one here, which is a new SQL Server standalone installation. And it's going to be presenting us with the terms of the license here. We're going to accept the license terms. Click Next. So now it asks if you want to turn on updates for SQL Server Studio. We definitely want to do that. We want to make sure automatic updates take place. It's going to quickly check for updates. Probably shouldn't find any because we just downloaded this file. It should be up to date. Okay, now it's presenting us with all the different options, this intimidating list of options and checkboxes here. Now, since we downloaded the version of SQL Server Express that already had all the tools available with it, all of those items are available here for selection. The key options that we need to check are the database engine, and we can uncheck server replication and full text and semantic extractions. And all the rest of the options should be fine. Just check at the bottom here. Make sure local DB is not checked. We don't need that. Okay, so at the bottom here, you're asked where to place the SQL program files for SQL Server Express. The default here are fine. Then we'll click Next. So this next step, it checks to see if you have all of the required items needed in order for a SQL Server to run. In this case, I'm missing Microsoft .NET Framework 3.5. So I'll go ahead and enable that, and then we'll come back to the installation. Okay, so I've enabled the .NET 3.5 framework, and also I'll rerun the check here. It should come back and go to the next step. So what we have is the next step here. So now we're being asked what the name of the instance is. That is, what's the name of SQL Server that's running? Not necessarily the database, but the whole instance of SQL Server on this computer. So we'll be leaving this as the default name of SQL Express. Go to the next step, click Next. So here we're being asked what accounts should be used to start the SQL Server services. You can leave these at their defaults and click Next. So this step asks about security on the database. Since we're running this as a standalone database for DVAAPBase, we'll leave this on Windows authentication mode. That means you will be able to access the database automatically via your Windows login settings. At the bottom here, we see the listing of what users are administrators of SQL Server. So you recall the administrator entered their password at the start of the installation, so they're already listed here automatically. But my username, in this case my name on this demonstration is called Joe Normal, is not shown here. I want to add myself as an administrator for the database so I can create databases, tables, and manage the SQL Server installation. So for a full install of SQL Server, the database administrator would set up privileges, but for this standalone install, I want to be the administrator as well. So I'll click Add, and I'll locate my name. So here's my login on this computer. So I'll click OK. And now I've been added as an administrator. So we'll go to the next step. So we'll leave the reporting services options at their normal install and configure settings and click Next. So now the installation actually starts. This will take a few minutes. So we'll skip to the end of the actual installation process as the little bar here fills up. Now the SQL Server Express install is complete, and we'll get a summary here of everything that was installed. And you should see green indicators for each item showing it succeeded and that there were no problems. So now that SQL Server Express is installed and running, we need to create the DVAAPBase database. To do this, we use SQL Server Management Studio, or SSMS, which is a program that was installed with SQL Server Express. SQL Server Management Studio lets you create databases and maintain SQL Server. So we'll close the installation. And if we look in the All Apps, scroll down to Microsoft SQL Server 2014. You see there's a lot of things that were installed here, and one of them is SQL Server 2014 Management Studio. So we'll start that up. So the first time you run SSMS, you'll need to confirm that you want to connect to the database that we just, the database engine that we just set up. So that'll be the first thing that displays on the screen here. So the server name will be the name of the computer followed by the name of the instance. In this case, we use the default, so it's SQL Express. The server type, just leave that at database engine. and leave this authentication at Windows Authentication. That'll use our login information. Since we made ourselves the administrators, that'll allow us to connect to the database. And click Connect. So on the left edge of the window, you should see the Object Explorer. This shows you everything that resides in your new SQL Server Express instance. If we expand the Databases node, we see a few things here. These are the databases that SQL Server creates on its own to manage various settings and tools within SQL Server. But we need to create our own database for DVAAPBase. To do this, we just right-click on Databases, say New Database. So the most important setting here is on this first page, the General Settings page. We need to enter the name of the database that we want to create here. The recommended default name is DVA_DB. So we'll write that, DVA uppercase _ DB lowercase. The rest of the settings here you can leave at their default values, but those can be adjusted later on if need be for storage, adjusting storage. And we click OK. So now if we look in the databases here, we'll see our DVAAPBase database. So the final step in the process is going to be to populate this database with all of the tables and the initial data that DVAAPBase requires. This is done using the DB Updater utility that was installed with the DVAAPBase supporting files. So we'll close SQL Server Management Studio, and we'll be going to the installation folder for those extra files. That's in your C drive, your program files, Gerstco, DVAAPBase, and here you go, DB Updater. Now if you used all of the suggested default settings when you installed SQL Server and created your DVAAPBase database, all you need to do is double-click the Run DB Updater file here. If you changed any of those settings, those defaults, you'll need to edit this file. So let's take a look at this. Let's edit this file and take a look at what's inside here. So there's only two items that can be adjusted in this file. The server indicates where SQL Server was installed and the name of the instance. If you installed SQL Server somewhere else besides your workstation, you would need to enter the computer name here. And if you used a name other than SQL Express, you would change that instance name here. Then we need to set the database name. Since we use the default DVA_DB, we don't need to change either of these. We have our server installed on our local host. That's our local computer here. We use the default name of SQL Express, and we use the recommended database name DVADB. So all we need to do is double-click on the Run DB Updater to set up the database. So you should see a list of a text scroll by indicating each step of the process and that it was successful. And at the bottom, you should see upgrade successful and a success at the end. If you see any error messages, consult with your IT support or Gerstco software support. So that completes the installation of SQL Server Express for DVAAPBase. To learn how to configure DVAAPBase to connect to your new database, please watch the video Connecting DVAAPBase to the Database in the Gerstco video training area.